Hello and welcome back. Well, this is kind of a day I was dreading. Today I need to work out how to mount the motor on top of the dust separator and also mount these things to the wall or fit them outside in our new little area that we've built for them. I guess there's two things we need to consider. One is the piping and connections. A lot of the ports on the devices are all different sizes. And then the other issue is to try and mount these things to the wall so that they're fixed and won't be moving around. The first thing I want to do is remove the motor from the impeller housing. And that is so I don't need to lift a whole heap of weight up when I'm making brackets and trying to fit this into that area. So I'll start by removing the cover here, and I've already put a witness mark here so I can put it back the same way. This Allen screw is left-hand thread, so you do the tighten up action to loosen it off. Once that's removed, I'm using my foot and a crowbar to apply pressure right under the impeller where it goes on the shaft, and I'm able to knock the shaft out and the impeller is free. Next, there are 4 bolts that hold the motor onto the impeller housing. Then that housing is now disconnected. That's going to be a lot easier to work with than trying to hold the motor and impeller all up outside on the corner. So I need to work out what we're going to do with the ports before mounting everything to the wall. The good news is that this inlet port is a 6-inch port, so I think I'll be able to get this bit of plastic pipe around here, and I'll be able to put some silicone seal around there, and that will be a good fit. The motor sits on top of the separator like this, and as you can see there is a massive port size difference here. This was something like 170mm, but it did come with this plastic piece that fits on here, although that port there is only 140mm. However, I can put a bit of 6-inch pipe over here and some silicone and push it all down, and that would work pretty good. Now I need to cut a bit of this pipe off, and also the black pipe that was only 140mm inside. Then all I have to contend with after that is to make the port on this green part a little bit bigger to fit. I've cut the right length of pipe and I've put a chamfer on the inside here so it's easier to get onto this metal piece. It fits on by hand, so it's a nice tight fit. And then we give it a bit of persuasion with the rubber nut. And that's all the way home there, and I'll put some silicone sealer maybe on the outside and the inside. I've put this piece of wood on the bottom here to lift up the system by 10mm because I'm going to need to get the bucket off so I can empty it. In doing that, I had to cut this hole about 10mm higher at the top here. The lid is connected to the Cyclone, and I'm going to use these mounting holes here to make a bracket to fix it to the wall. I made this little template here so that I get the right arc. And then there'll be holes in here, and of course it'll be connected by some metal to the wall there. This is 50mm equal angle. I cut off 2 pieces because I need 2 brackets to hold this separator. I mark out where one of the holes are and then measure the distance between there and mark the other hole. Then I line those holes up, and then I can draw the little arc that needs to be cut out. I cut that out on the grinder and I just pull all these pieces out. Then over to the belt grinder, I can use the wheel to make this a nice smooth arc. Now we're doing a test fit. These bolts will be cut shorter obviously, but that works okay. The second bolt in there, perfect, and the metal bracket will be over to the wall there. Also checked it on the other side of the separator and it works perfect there, so all I have to do is make an exact copy for this side. The 2 brackets are done, and now I start working on the brackets that go onto the wall. This is 40mm by 5mm flat bar, cutting off a couple of pieces at 150mm, about 6 inches. those pieces are center punched, then drilled out, and also countersunk for the mounting screws. I round off the corners so that they're not sharp. Then the brackets are screwed into the wall. I'm screwing into studs and nogs that are behind the wall. And remember, we have 21mm plywood cladding on here as well, so it's plenty strong enough. There'll be a bar that goes at the back here on this one, and on the left there'll be a bar that goes there, and that's what we're going to make next. I started off using cardboard as a template, and this worked okay, but it's very two-dimensional, so I wanted to mimic the steel that I was going to use, which will be square. I found some wood, and I'm cutting some compound miter angles here on the compound saw. That's the piece on the left, which will fit in there like that. And the piece on the right will go there like that. Now I transfer those angles onto the bits of steel that I have. And I was trying to be very careful so I could get this as accurate as I could. Then that compound miter angle is cut off. Now before the keyboard warriors start smashing on the keyboard, yes, I know this grinder does not have a guard on it. Yes, I know it's dangerous. Please do not do what I do. I tack the steel bar in place with the wall bracket and with the bracket on the bin. Then I take it off the wall and the bin, bring it into the garage and weld it properly in there. That bracket is then all cleaned up with a flat disc and a wire wheel. I clean it all down in some acetone and then I paint it ready for installation. The bracket is then installed onto the bucket and then screwed to the wall. I tack the second bracket in place and that's welded and cleaned up and painted off camera. You notice that I've repainted in here as well to get rid of the burn marks. The second bracket is then fitted to the bucket and the wall. Those are the two brackets in place and that is really, really strong. Bucket can go under, clips go on, and then that bucket clips on there. Now this separator was designed to be used with a separate pump, so where the Cyclone meets the bucket, it's fixed in position here. Dust collectors with the motor on the top will have a rubber boot that holds the lid onto the separator like in this picture. So the bucket's going to have to be lifted off the ground. So I'm going to have to use bits of wood to put under here so that it can hold the weight when the bucket starts getting full. Now I start working on this top connection for the impeller, and this black piece will go on. There'll be some silicone seal around here, and I need to cut a piece off the black piece. Then a piece of this white pipe will fit over the top and we'll silicone seal that around as well. This piece is too long, so I will need to cut a piece off here. Then I have to modify the impeller housing so that the ports work together with the ones on the dust collector. There will be brackets going from the impeller housing to the wall here and also on the other side here. The first step is to cut this black piece down a bit, and I'm using a multi-tool for that task. Then silicone sealer around the ports here. And that piece is fitted into place. More silicone on the black part and the inside of the white pipe. And then the white pipe is also fitted into place. Now I need to match the white pipe on the dust collector with the port here, which is a bit smaller. I'm going to use a bit of plywood all the way around. That will be bolted to the piece here. Then the pipe will sit on that. And then there'll be another bit of plywood that'll go here, and the pipe will be on the inside of it. And I can put silicone sealer around there as well. I mark out about a 300 diameter piece of 21mm thick plywood. And that's roughly cut out with a jigsaw. Now there's a step in here where the plywood's going to go on. So I'm going to have to router out something, or gee, I don't know what to do here. Hang on. I think I've got a plan. As you can see, it's quite handy having a wood lathe. Now I need to drill this 4mm hole in here for the router to cut the centre out later. Then I start cutting the centrepiece out. It's about 3.5mm depth I need. Just finishing off the other way. Looks good. Now we cut that centre piece out with the router. I need to chamfer this corner here, so I'm just using a bit of sandpaper. And then that fits on there, and it is perfect. It came out pretty good. Now I'm over on the drill press. I drill 4 holes in here. So silicon sealer goes around there, and I also put some around the bolt holes as well to give it some strength. Wooden part goes on, and these bolts go in. These are M6 bolts, and I love using nylock nuts on these because nylock nuts do not come loose. Those bolts nuts are tightened up, and then I start working on the smaller piece. So same process here. Draw out a circle. I had a better idea and cut this out with the bandsaw instead of the jigsaw. I need to cut a groove in this piece of plywood about 10mm deep to suit the 6-inch pipe. I'm using a parting tool on the lathe here. I check out the depth and we're about 10mm, which is what I need. Silicon goes around here on the first bit of plywood. We put our second piece on, and then that's screwed down with 8 stainless screws. It's probably not necessary, but I put a bit of silicone on the inside here just to seal it up in case there's some sort of air leak somewhere. The cover is then screwed back onto the impeller housing, and I test fit that on top of the dust separator, and that fits on brilliantly. The original mounting bolts were only about 1/4 inch. I thought that was a bit small for a big heavy motor, so I drill these out and I tap them for M8. I cut 2 pieces of steel for the permanent brackets that go onto the impeller housing. I've drilled 1 hole and bolted that down, and then that allows me to mark out the other 2 holes. Those are center punched, and I drill those out off camera. Then I fit the bracket back onto the impeller housing, and I do the same for the other side. Now I've cut 2 more pieces of steel the same size, and they will be clamped here. So these are the ones which will be welded to brackets that go onto the wall. I remove the bracket and I'll be drilling 3 holes in here so these can be bolted together. That's done off camera, and I weld the heads of the bolts onto these steel plates. I have it sitting in situ. This is the impeller housing bracket that stays there. This second bracket is bolted on, and that will be fixed to the wall. So all I need to do to put the motor in place is to lower the motor down. The bolts will go through the holes, and then I can tighten up the nuts. The same happens for the bracket at the back as well. So that will be fixed to the wall, and then I just lower the motor down and the studs will go through the holes, and then I can put the nylock nuts on. I start fabricating the brackets that go onto the wall, or the one round the back anyway. This piece has 3 holes drilled through it so that a coach screw can go through. I need to drill pilot holes in the wall here. They go into the nogs on the other side, and they're for the coach screws. Then that plate is screwed on. I've got these 2 blocks here clamped in place. They're 80mm high and 60mm wide, and I'm going to tack down here underneath and up here just to tack all in place. Sometimes it's a little hard to get the stick welder started, but once it starts going, it welds not too bad. Once that's tacked in place, I loosen off the 3 nuts holding on the impeller housing, and that is lifted off. Then take out the 2 coach screws that were holding the plate on the wall. It's a bit tight to get off, and I'll come back and touch the wall up with some new paint. I take the bracket into the garage where I've got access to it all round and weld it properly. I clean it all up and paint it off camera, and then I fit it to the wall here. There's actually 3 bolts that go at the bottom here. Then I bring the impeller housing in and line up the bolt holes, and that fits in there nicely. I added an extra plate at the top here, and I'm putting another 3 screws in. Probably a bit of overkill, but you never know. Off camera I made the second bracket, and I bolt that bracket to the wall as well. Then I bring the impeller back in and line up all the bolt holes, and that fits in there nicely. Now that's a better shot of the bracket, and it's made the same way with a flat piece bolted to the wall and a 80 by 60mm rectangle tubing welded to it. The bracket sticks out quite far from the wall, so there's a lot of leverage there with the weight of the motor. So I put this angle bracket in here, and I've also got a threaded rod at the top here to take some of the weight as well. This is a shot of the bracket that holds the threaded rod up in the ceiling. Once I have the motor back on the impeller and fitted in place, there's 3 bolts sticking through here, and I'll put nylock nuts on those to hold it all in place. I remove the 2 brackets from the impeller housing. These are then cleaned up in acetone, and I spray them with some black spray paint. While the paint's drying, I mount the motor to the impeller housing. Then the impeller is fitted, and this screw, remember, is left-hand thread, so that's screwed in backwards and then of course nipped up with a Allen wrench. The cover goes on. There are 12 screws to go in here, and they're all nipped up nice and tight. I left these brackets to dry overnight, and then the next morning they're bolted onto the impeller housing. Now you can see why I removed the motor and just worked with the impeller housing. This thing is so heavy. I've got my son here helping, and once we get a good grip on it, we're able to line up those bolt holes and at least get them started in the holes. Now when we were looking at the brackets, the bolts weren't all the way down, and it just needed a little thump in the side here to line up the center pipe from the separator, and then that went down, and that is nice and solid. There are 3 bolts on each bracket. I put on some washers and some nylock nuts, and then those nylock nuts are tightened down on both sides. I don't know if this is the exciting part or the scary part, but we plug it in and she goes. There's a large volume of air coming out here, so I'm pretty happy with that. There's very little vibration as well. And then I unplug it and it winds down. What I can't show you is how much vacuum there is, or suction, inside the shop, and that's because I've got a bunch of open ports here still. This one here is for the bandsaw and down by the lathe. This one is above the lathe, so that'll be for sanding. This one's above the window, that'll go across the other side of the room. And I had one cap that I was able to put on the suite down the far end of the shop. So I'm going to get some caps and temporary block up these ports, and then we'll have a better idea on how much suction there is. Now this video is pretty much complete, but there's a few things I still need to do. I've got to put a couple of power points here, one for the dust extractor and one for the compressor, and they will go up to the other side of the wall where these switches are here, isolating switches, one for each, although the dust extractor will be triggered by opening the blast gates to turn it on. Also need to deal with the outlet here and where that's going to get ducted to. So that's pretty much it for this video. I'm pretty happy that that's in there and it's pretty secure and there's not much vibration. I hope everyone has a great day, and once again, thanks for watching.